Professor Dr. Grace Ramos would like to extend her heartfelt gratitude to the organizing committee for being part of this very important activity. On behalf of Dean Grace Ramos, I will be presenting her paper entitled Urban Resilience and the Ephemeral Dimension of Southeast Asian Cities. And this research sought to answer the question, how do the spatial interpretations of resilience in ephemeral settings accord with urban agility concepts? So the aftermaths of extreme weather conditions indicate that the usual adaptation strategies and conventional space design expression of resilience are no longer adequate. Our design regulation systems that aim at life safety and well-being are laden with prescriptions that are based on the conventional notion of safe spaces. So the concept of safe spaces has traditionally been translated into rigid enclosures that project strength, stability, and protection. People seek permanent structures and formally delineated territories to convey identity, pride, and social status. So space production amid dynamic physical and social context represents the paradox that results in planning interventions that account for risk vulnerability, and agility as well as flexibility have been the buzzwords in recent years after the experiences wrought by disasters due to natural and human-induced factors. However, our city formation in the Philippines continues to express itself in dense, massive, and impermeable built and design environments. Cities are organic entities that constantly change and are functional systems that are disrupted by disasters, economic downtrends, conflicts, and social network reorganization. Amid these dynamic layers of multidimensional context, our urban forms remain massive, rigid, and over-regulated. Hence, we lack in flexibility that should enable them to respond with agility. So the sub-questions focus on spatial interpretations, ephemeral settings, and agility concepts. And these are the questions that will be answered in this presentation. Our design regulation systems that aim at life safety and well-being are laden with prescriptions that are based on the conventional notion of space safety. The concept of safe spaces has traditionally been translated into rigid enclosures that project strength, stability, and protection. People seek permanent structures and formally delineated territories to convey identity, pride, and social status. Spatial interpretations were drawn from the observed urban form changes over 10 years in 3 Typhoon Haiyan-affected localities in the Philippines. These localities are the cities of Ormoc and Tacloban and the municipality of Palo, all of which ran along the path of Haiyan and thus registered high casualties and property losses. So let's go through the key concepts underlying the research. Cities are ecological systems with interrelated parts. And these parts include natural and built elements that should function in harmony. Sorry for the technical glitch. These parts include natural and built elements that should function in harmony. Disruptions cause varying degrees of breakdowns in the multi-layered networks of urban settings. With individual or concerted local and national interventions, networks are either restored or improved, oftentimes short-windowed for bringing in well-thought-out interventions requires very timely responses. Resilience rendered by the ability to move and reconfigure is seen in the natural world where flee or adapt options are key to survival. Adaptation to the changing season is seen in the patterns of migration and hibernation in the animal world. The chameleon metaphor is drawn from the ability of a reptile to change its skin color to match its environment. The changing demographic forms, the changing seasons, unpredicted events, and shifting interracial and power networks, as well as life cycles, are among the many variables that define human life settings. The city's physical and social environments are in constant motion due to the confluence of dynamic variables. Globalization, urbanization, and technology development are processes that account for fast-paced changes that are all embedded in international value chain networks. Socioeconomic induced changes are overlain by disruptions due to nature and human-induced disasters. The ephemeral nature of urban contexts calls for built forms that can easily adapt to forecasted and unexpected events. Ephemeral spaces and design concepts that cater to variables in motion have been in existence for many years and therefore not entirely new. Ephemeral architecture are expressed in examples such as exposition pavilions and flea markets. Transformable architecture accommodates different functions at different time periods through operable components. And these are examples of mobile car wash and wellness services. A rolling seafood store in a gated village brings the public market to the residents' doorsteps. Various typologies of transient spaces that cater to different lengths of stay, which include rental housing, hotels, and events and venues. So we have fleeting urban spaces such as flea markets, street activities, and park concerts that have defined urban settings that are referred to as vibrant. Plazas are enlivened by the activities that change on an hourly or daily basis. In the age of digitalization, virtual outdoor spaces were created through the laser beam and drone technologies. And these are just some of the design concepts that consider the temporal attribute of spaces and the activities they accommodate. Southeast Asia is a very dynamic context given its role in global production network. We have Southeast Asia also, which is marked by great diversity in culture, in economy, and geographical features. And we have Southeast Asia being the host of the largest megacities with densities that make for high levels of exposure to climate change-induced extreme events. So we have multinodal metropolitan agglomerations that are found in coastal settings that are vulnerable to sea level rise. So our country's physical geography exposes many of its settlements to water-based risks such as flooding, storm surge, and tsunamis. Lying just below the equator, it experiences an average of 17 typhoons annually. As one of the Asia-Pacific Rim countries, it is also among those at risk due to volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. And based on the Climate Risk Index, the Philippines ranks 10th in the list of countries that were most affected by climate change from 1993 to 2022. So the research presents a model that assesses the observed spatial translations in the case study areas in relation to the indicators of urban agility. The assessment led to baselines for space production, innovation based on agility indices. So the specific form of urban elements that were observed and compared over a 10-year period included housing, infrastructure, public spaces, commercial and livelihood areas, and the natural environment. And these were assessed vis-a-vis the long-term and comprehensive plans that were formulated 10 years ago. So we have the following images in the succeeding slides that represent the different spatial interpretation of resilience as the three localities sought to recover from the Haiyan disaster. The most visible public sector intervention is a 27.3-kilometer long tide embankment that ran along Tacloban City and the municipalities of Palo. So we have the 3-meter high seawall that connects the three localities along the coast through a 3-meter wide pedestrian and bike path that is accessed through stairs and at selected intervals. And this video gives us a sense of how it has cut off the water from the land-based activities. Now, let's look quickly at the different spatial interpretations as well as translations in the three sites identified. First is Palo in Leyte. So we have these statements, the vision statement of Palo Leyte, and this statement represents the physical translations of the locally crafted vision statement that reflected the intent for the town to be a government center, an information technology hub, a cultural core, and a convergence point. So the vision statement during the planning stage physically translated to this spatial strategy and land use plan that indicates the hope to create a new sub-center. There are new settlement sites that were developed, and these were situated further inland, away from the coast that were identified. There were more stringent building and development regulations that were formulated for the 6 overlay zones. So the first to be restored in Palo Leyte were the symbols of local pride, and we have the MacArthur Landing Memorial in its damaged state. And then 10 years later, more tourism facilities were built around the memorial. However, you can see here that the effect of the tide embankment on the landscape and seascape. There used to be seamless visual connection between the memorial and the San Pablo Bay, but now there is this 3-meter high seawall in between them. This is the newly built museum near the Memorial Plaza. We have here the Palo Cathedral, which serves as a cultural icon, which was heavily damaged by Haiyan's strong winds. Many people sought refuge during the peak of typhoon, but the cathedral dome collapsed eventually. So this is the restored cathedral that is located right across the municipal hall. Another tourism site that was further developed is the Ginangandang Hill that has a cross on top and many Second World War artifacts along the 100 steps leading up to the top. Businesses were also revived, including hotels that were flattened to the ground, and it lies on the no-build zone, but unfortunately, the resort hotel was reconstructed on the same site. This bridge was unusable even by pedestrians 10 years ago. It has been replaced by this steel bridge. These images show the condition around the bridge area, and you can see here that buildings and houses have remained along the river. And this is the river lined up with houses on its two sides. Another improvements include road widening and construction of new roads to service the remote communities. Slaughterhouses were also constructed to support food production and processing. There were also recreational spaces that double up as evacuation areas. We also have livelihood centers that were constructed during that time. Community centers. We have waste management facilities with recycling and waste-related livelihood facilities. New bypass roads to enhance mobility. Access roads leading to green spaces. Institutional facilities such as the prison was restored. There were paved roads servicing the agricultural communities. This street that used to have only one restaurant is now a vibrant food street lined up with many restaurants and fast food chains. There were also new health facilities, mobile clinics, health stations, UP campus, one of our campuses, under the University of the Philippines system in Palo was in this sad state 10 years ago. But it has been restored and new buildings were added. From tents that housed evacuees, we have temporary housing provided by the government, new permanent housing sites that have been constructed, and this is another permanent housing site, and another building developed by Choose Cheap Foundation. What was noticeable 10 years later is the addition of third-level roof deck spaces. So those are architectural interventions initiated at the household level after Typhoon Haiyan. Tacloban is another capital city of Leyte. And its vision is to be a globally competitive, green, and resilient city propelled by God-loving, gender-responsive leaders and empowered citizenry. So this vision is crafted as a translation of spatial strategy that identified growth nodes. And this is the land use plan showing the expansion and growth areas. And this is the water use map that regulated the use of the marine resources. The city worked on strengthening its institutional presence to cater to the needs of the people. And also, this was done to redevelop the City Hall complex. So it also worked on the upgrading of the symbols of pride, such as the San Juanico Bridge and its surrounding areas. Among the projects completed is the causeway. This is another site that was developed during that time. So the highway fronting the memorial site was expanded for better mobility. No build zones were designated, but some of these areas have been built on the recent years to accommodate new businesses. There were also new permanent housing development that are located on the northern part of the city. And we have these areas located in elevation identified as areas with higher slopes. Most of the new housing sites were developed through donated funds and were given to beneficiaries for free. It's business as usual in the old city center, and the commercial streets are presently throbbing with life. So the buildings are fully occupied but are not well maintained based on the quality of the facades. Heritage buildings are tapped for commercial use as a source of income. And this is another heritage building that survived during the typhoon. This is the convention center, which serves as the nerve center for relief and response activities. So it has been redeveloped into a commercial and tourism center with coffee shops and souvenir stores. This is the park around the convention center, and you can see here the tide embankment. This is the City Hall extension building that doubles an evacuation space. So you would see the different spaces that were developed during the time in response to the disaster. And this is the rejuvenated part of the public market and port area. And this is the coastal market, which is very crowded and teeming with life. So these are other coastal parks with a tide embankment. So you would see here the interface between the seawall and the water bodies. And this connects Tacloban with the neighboring town of Palo. And this image would show us how the fisher folk and the fishing villages have been affected by the construction of the tide embankment. So in many parts along the 27-kilometer-long seawall, informal businesses such as this one emerged. Another site identified was the city of Ormoc, and it has branded itself mainly as the renewable energy capital of the Philippines. The same pulling away from the center spatial strategy was adopted based on its comprehensive land use plan. So with the land use plan indicating the protected areas such as Lake Danau and the agricultural areas. So there are overlay zones that identified stricter sets of development guidelines that were delineated. And planning went through the same process where disaster risk reduction management is mainstreamed. So we have the SIV analysis factored in all the land and water-based hazards. We have the city of Ormoc, which is more inland and has less casualties than Palo and Tacloban, but it was being devastated by flash floods a number of times. The pride of place is reflected by the city symbols and landmarks. And it calls itself as the city of beautiful people. So the world's largest geothermal power plant under one roof is the Tongonon Cananga Leyte. And this is a 960 megawatt solar farm. All the foregoing interpretations that translated into infrastructure and services were against or assessed vis-a-vis urban agility indicators. Agility factors that affect the timeliness of urban responses, which include human, built form, and technology components. And these agility factors enable us to identify what are the possible flexibilities that we can do during the occurrence of a typhoon, even after the occurrence of a disaster. So given these indicators in terms of architecture, referring to the residential and non-residential buildings, so we have the three identified sites that presented to us the forms of intervention to make urban form more agile. So there have been adaptive responses, such as construction of roof decks as an example of an agility factor. And we have also different components that were interchangeable to allow the people to determine what should be the best option to have them safe in a space that will be identified for development. Agility is significantly enabled by technology and innovation. And we know innovation would always drives growth and development. So there has been digitalization initiatives in the form of websites, geographic information system, technologies that will fully harness the skills of the residents as well as the decision makers in a specific locality. So we have the state of natural environment that would provide us an idea on how infrastructure and development projects are being laid out given the resources of the different local government units. So in lieu of hard infrastructure, you witnessed a while ago that there were concrete tied embankments. There were other alternatives that work well with nature that could be explored. And there were co-management agreements, meaning there's a partnership between the local government units and the people, as well as the government agencies operating in the site, in terms of what type of development should be introduced after the occurrence of a disaster. And it is important that public spaces and basic services should be accessible to all, rich and poor, young and old, and they should be affordable by all regardless of social status. There are several opportunities that were presented earlier, and these opportunities can be further explored or developed, and this could include development of systems, planning mechanisms, as well as implementation mechanisms that would allow the local government unit to decide and also implement programs and projects given the limited financial resources. So there are alternatives to long-term and strategic land use plans, as well as new forms of real estate financing that the government can also consider. And this is part of the agility factors that I mentioned earlier. So there are long-term plans that would provide us some sense of stability, but it should allow the local government unit to work together in the event that there are unforecasted conditions that would emerge. We also have to tap the informal knowledge to mobilize communities towards urban resilience. And we have to make the most of our indigenous knowledge as well as available tacit information that can better localize our responses, including the indigenous people who are also considered as vulnerable sector of our locality. So we also have to strike the balance in enhancing the capability of our human resources, in maximizing the use of our technology, as well as looking at some ways or mechanism on how the natural elements of a city can be considered in order to develop urban resilience. And there are several strategies I mentioned earlier to include introduction of digital literacy and designing of systems that will provide communities with real-time information. Agility or flexibility or immediate response to a certain occurrence, stress or shocks or pressures can be also resolved through the formulation of development plans. And this may be implemented incrementally, meaning by phase. You will not implement that in one period of time. And there should be a way to iterate, because you have to test the possible outcomes of implementing these proposed interventions so that the completion of projects would provide benefits to the community residents given limited resources. And very important is collaboration with the local government unit, with the national government agency, with the people's organization, with non-government organization, with the members of the academia, and that will provide us the totality of how development should proceed in the aftermath of a disaster. Agility or the flexibility of an entity would allow us to rationalize and address the possible problems that would be confronted by a certain community. In conclusion, in the last 10 years, there have been great strides towards making towns and cities in the Philippines, wherein we have to consider the negative impacts of climate change, and we have to develop resilient cities, as seen in the cases of Palo, Tacloban, and Ormoc. With the higher levels of risk confronting us, we are one in addressing all these solutions. We keep on enhancing our mechanisms for the people to be resilient in different disasters that we are experiencing. So the current conditions present an array of opportunities to go beyond the traditional space as well as its form in terms of space creation. So I would like to end this presentation, given this paradigm shift, that we need to identify the suitable space when we want to introduce development. And this space should be accessible to all. We have the people who needs capability building, who needs to be introduced on innovation and technologies that would make them resilient. And very important is timing. We could have programs and projects that can be implemented incrementally so that we take into consideration the available resources. We need to redefine concepts of location. Where do we locate people who were impacted by these disasters? Who should own the land? Where should they be located after being displaced by disaster? And this will have to combine with paradigm shifts in governance and socio-cultural mindsets. And ending this presentation, I just would like to emphasize that this triad, space, people, and time, would provide us the agility or the ability to meet and be resilient in cases of these natural disasters. Thank you very much.